Now, the Legend of Zelda series is no stranger to conflict. Every place we have visited in the games has gone through some sort of rough patch. For example, war, natural disasters, and a whole lot more. But luckily enough, Link was always there to save the day, which almost always resulted in a positive outcome of some sort. However, which events seen in the series were the most devastating and scary? We have seen loads after all, more than you would imagine at least. Well, today we will find out, because I was completely in the mood to talk about dark and depressing stuff, because that's my bread and butter. I need it to live. So let's have a look at the top 5 times the world was doomed in the Zelda series. Number 5. Now, while the gods and protagonists of the Zelda series seem smart most of the time, they are actually incredibly dumb and can't think ahead at all. I'm not even lying. If you would play a game of chess or checkers with them, they wouldn't see any of your advanced moves coming because their thought process is so basic. And thanks to that, they have done certain things that might have seemed smart at first, but actually doomed entire generations of people. Especially Zelda is really dumb, because she thought that it was a good idea to send the hero of her timeline back in time, allowing him to solve the problem before it even happened, which then created a completely different timeline. And thanks to that, they didn't have a hero. And so many generations after his departure, it all went wrong. The seal of the 7 sages began to weaken for an unknown reason, and Ganondorf managed to escape his imprisonment. As darkness was covering the land, the people of Hyrule prayed to the hero of time that he would once again come to save them. But no hero appeared. Ah, don't you love Zelda? A person who has godly powers, but the brain and foresight of an 8th grader. And so, after many other plans failed, they were left with no other choice. The people started to pray to the 3 golden goddesses. They answered their call and came up with an even better idea, instructing those chosen to flee to Hyrule's mountaintops in order to escape the upcoming flood, which was there to solve the Ganon problem. Clearly, we also get some big brain vibes from the strongest and most mighty beings in the universe. Because this is just a great idea, guys. There was truly no other way to solve this. And so the world turned into a huge ocean, and everyone's houses were destroyed, as well as the beautiful land surrounding them, forcing the people of Hyrule to build a new civilization on the surface of the Great Sea, and with the passing of time, they would forget about all of this. However, this is still one of the darkest and most destructive things to have ever happened to the world of Hyrule. Sure, a lot of lives were spared, but the once breathtaking lands are gone. This includes the forests where a lot of minor races lived, like the Deku Scrubs, as well as creatures seen at the foot of Death Mountain, like the Gorons, who are rarely seen in the game that came after these events. So, while they did solve their problems after a lot of utterly stupid decision making, it came at a huge cost, and the world was never the same after this. Number 4. Now, while a lot of the problems in the series are caused by the main heroes, funny enough, it isn't always the case. And there's one great example of this, to be honest. Here, everyone was at fault, not just the royal family or Link. Because long ago in the land of Hyrule, legend spoke of a great power left behind by the golden goddesses. Thanks to this, stories speaking of the sacred realm and the mighty golden power known as the triforce started to spread. And so people wanted this powerful artifact, and bit by bit their lust for it was growing, until there was nothing left in many of them but pure greed. And since the Triforce could not judge between good and evil, and thus would merely grant the wish of its holder, everyone was going for it. And one day, Ganondorf found the entrance to the lands where it was hidden, and so a long-running battle then ensued between Ganondorf and his followers to the heart of the Sacred Realm in a race to reach the Triforce first. And when he got the chance to make his wish, he said he wanted to rule all, giving him the Triforce of power, making him incredibly strong, which also impacted the Sacred Realm itself. It began to wither and die as it was transformed into a twisted copy of Hyrule that represented what Hyrule would look like if Ganondorf ruled it. In the end, many greedy people were drawn to the realm and all of them became monsters, becoming part of Ganondorf's army. And when the time was right, he attacked Hyrule, which resulted in a battle between the Knights of Hyrule and Ganondorf's army for the fate of the land. And in the end, they won, and sealed the gateway between the Sacred Realm and Hyrule, saving Hyrule from any further damage. However, the once beautiful lands created by the gods were lost to evil for good. There was nothing that could save it. So while Hyrule was overall fine after this, the world known as the Sacred Realm would never be the same after these events, being utterly doomed. Number 3. Now, most of us think that Hyrule is unbeatable and basically wins every war they get into. But actually, they aren't always the victor. There are many conflicts where the warriors of the land are unable to do anything and just get destroyed in mere seconds. And in all of the games, there's one title where we clearly see such a thing. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Here you turn into a wolf thanks to the effects of the Twilight magic. And when you're taken to the prison of Hyrule Castle and escape, you get to meet Hyrule's princess, Zelda, the apparently former ruler of the lands. Because she tells Link that, unbeknownst to the rest of the world, which makes this quite a shocking statement, the monarchy of Hyrule has been overthrown by Zant, the villain. A powerful Twilight who took over the dark realm he came from with the help of Ganondorf, and now calls himself the King of Twilight. His plan is to cover the whole expanse of Hyrule in this dark matter, merging Hyrule and his kingdom, the Twilight Realm, into one land under his rule. And the crazy thing is, he actually succeeds in doing this. Well, almost. Since he took over everything except the Ordon region, although that would have also fallen in time. He was busy taking it over after all, conquering ground incredibly quickly since certain portions were taken over within a day, like the Faron Woods that we go to in the beginning but are taken over later. So to be honest, he basically succeeded and all the people who lived there turned into some sort of light spirits, being filled with fear because of all of the monsters around them. It's quite crazy to think about, but most inhabitants of Hyrule live alive for a very long time, only being truly free much later in the game. So clearly the mighty army of Hyrule doesn't always win. And if Link didn't come around the corner, the world would have never recovered from this event. Number 2. Now, while the Kingdom of Hyrule was almost destroyed in my previous example, there are also games where this did happen and no one came to save them. For example, in Ocarina of Time, the world turned into hell for 7 years, but was at least fixed by Link at some point. However, there was one game where the hero truly lost and the world was destroyed for the most part, being saved by Zelda in the last second from utter destruction. Although that was not a permanent solution. This was in Breath of the Wild, where you learn at the beginning of the game from King Roam that 100 years prior, a great evil known as the Calamity Ganon rose up and laid waste to the kingdom and its people. Unable to be defeated, it was sealed within Hyrule Castle, while the ruins of the land were ravaged by nature over time. And although he was trapped, the Calamity Ganon was growing in power, and Link had to defeat it in time before it broke free and destroyed the remainder of the world. Although I gotta say there wasn't much left. Now all of this went wrong because they recycled an old strategy, using technology to beat him. But when he ultimately attacked, he devastated the Kingdom of Hyrule by taking control of the ancient machines they used and turned them against the forces of Hyrule. And during this counterattack of the villain, Link even died, only being able to come back after recovering for 100 years. And while this is tragic, the real victims are the citizens of Hyrule. Throughout the land we can find evil monsters, destroyed villages, and corruption everywhere. The amount of people that met their end must have been insane. Easily half of the population, probably even more, making this the worst event to have ever happened in the history of Hyrule. But there's an even darker event that's seen in a different world. Number 1. Now, as you all know, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is my favorite game by far. It's just so incredibly good. However, this game is also really weird. It's not set in Hyrule, there are powerful magical masks everywhere, a huge moon is coming down, you're able to time travel, and you have just 3 days to beat the game. So it's not easy to deal with all of this. People especially have a big problem with the time limit, but luckily enough you can do those 3 days over and over, allowing you to do completely new things in that cycle. However, while almost no one does so, something interesting happens when you run out of time. The most destructive event in the history of the franchise. because you basically failed to stop the Skull Kid, and so he uses the power of Majora's Mask to cause the moon to descend upon the land of Termina, destroying the entire world. And so the moon becomes engulfed in a ball of fire, and will draw loose rocks off the surface of the planet with its tidal force, landing on the clock tower, destroying it. And then it hits the ground, causing a huge fiery shockwave, with everything on the world being swept away by the fire, turning the once beautiful lands of Termina into ash, which is then followed by someone, presumably the Happy Mask Salesman, speaking of Link's terrible fate, while the Happy Mask Salesman laugh is heard in the background. Clearly a very dark and unsettling event, which could have been the future of the land, but luckily enough Link was there to save them, because otherwise there wouldn't be anything left there but a fiery wasteland.